Hi, I'm Ann Kim, a senior editor at Washington Monthly, and this is the latest in our series of short conversations with contributors to the monthly. My guest today is clean energy and climate expert Laura Gillum. She is the founder and president of Resilient Path Strategies. Laura was also a former senior official at the Office of Management and Budget under President Joe Biden. Hey, Laura, it's great to see you.
It's so nice to see you. Thank you for having me today. And thank you for allowing me to tell this important story.
Yeah, absolutely. So the piece you wrote for the monthly was titled Trump's Opposition to Clean Energy is Costing You Money. Now, before we get into the details of why that's going to be the case, I want to set the table just a little bit. Before Trump returned to office, the United States was about to make the largest clean energy investments in its history, but now it's not. So what happened?
The Biden administration and Congress passed two major pieces of legislation: the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. I may call them Bill and IRA for short moving forward, but in the Bill and IRA combined, there was over $400 billion investments in our energy infrastructure between those two bills. A large portion of that was in tax credits, but something that doesn't get reported as often are the loans and grant programs that were included in both the bipartisan infrastructure law and the IRA. That money was not just going to clean, what people think as renewable energy, just solar and wind. It was going towards geothermal, hydrogen, our transmission lines, our grids. This wasn't just a renewable energy investment. This was a from the top to the bottom energy infrastructure investment that was sorely needed. Beyond energy, the bipartisan infrastructure law also invested in other infrastructure, our water, our transportation. So this was what the first Trump administration claimed as infrastructure week. The Biden administration was actually able to bring you, I would say, infrastructure administration, making the largest investment in our infrastructure since the New Deal. And we were able to obligate, meaning we were able to contract over 90% of the Inflation Reduction Act money. And we were able to obligate most of the bipartisan infrastructure law money, which is appropriated every single year. So, in a very short amount of time, we were able to not only find applicants, but go under contract with applicants. So that money was in the hands of communities when the Biden administration, gave over the keys to the Trump administration.
Can you give like a specific example of the kind of project that you obligated? Like, were these in small towns? Were these big city projects? Like, what's an example of the kind of thing that you saw happening?
Yeah, something that's near and dear to my heart is the Solar for All program, which Congress provided $7 billion to allow states and local communities to create their own solar program. So, for example, this was going into not just urban low income communities, but also rural, especially rural low income communities where it's hard to get community solar projects capitalized. It's just not profitable for companies to do so. So, your apartment buildings, low income housing, trying to provide solar for these communities. And why is this important? Because once somebody has a solar panel on their homes, it makes that home or apartment building more resilient to extreme weather. So if your power lines go down, you still have the solar power that's available. It also provides cheap energy and helps communities cut the electric cord, so it gives them a lot more independence and frees up money because more low income families spend more money, more of their income on energy than any other, than most other expenses. And this money was out the door, was in states, in communities. So in Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, across the board. And the Trump administration has tried to claw that money back. It's in the courts now. The applicants who have a contract with the federal government are suing to keep their money. But if this money is clawed back, that is a lot of megawatts of
Yeah.
solar that's out there that would provide much needed energy to not only low income communities, but also to the grid at a time when we're having high energy demand.
Yeah. Now, Trump has tried to claw back a lot more than just solar for all, right? I mean,
That's
he's
right.
tried to claw back just
That's
about
right.
everything.
That's right. That's just that's one example. The one program, the the administration is looking to claw back honestly most of the IRA grants and loan program. I think at DOE they're looking at clawing back over $20 billion, and then at EPA they've tried to claw back the Solar for All program and the Greenhouse Gas Bank, which was an infrastructure bank for clean energy and providing opportunity, providing a lot of flexibilities and making sure that taxpayer money goes a long way. It was the infrastructure bank was requires that money is revolved, meaning that the money that was put into the infrastructure bank would be able to go into the future and be able to leverage capital. So there again, I it is like hopes and dreams money of like, well, we hope that people could use this money. This was actually in people's hands. Manufacturers were starting to break ground, assuming that they had this money. And now that the money is uncertain, like I said, there's lawsuits that are happening. Not everyone can sue, not everyone can afford to go to court. And so there's a lot of communities that are no longer going to have these funds to help out with energy costs, to help out with bringing new energy to the grid. And I think you're going to see higher energy prices because of it. And you're definitely already seeing a lag in manufacturing because of these contracts being, you know, essentially dissolved by the Trump administration.
Yeah. And presumably some jobs lost too if the money has dried
Definitely.
up.
Definitely.
Yeah. So basically, what you're saying is that the US has kind of abdicating its leadership in clean energy by rescinding so many of these contracts from both the Infrastructure Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. And that leaves a vacuum. Nature, as we know, abhors a vacuum. And into that void is China. And that's something else that you wrote about in your piece. China, on the one hand, still burns a ton of coal and fossil fuels, but you write that they're also making a huge play in clean energy. Can you explain how China is grabbing the lead in global clean energy production?
Yes, thank you for that question. It is something that is not new. China has been really making this move for the last, I would say, over the last decade, if not longer, in capitalizing the clean energy market. I think, a lot of folks in the clean energy space want to ignore the coal investments that China's making. They are making heavy investments in coal. Part of that is because they don't have the natural gas resources that we have here in the United States. They're also trying to catch up on nuclear. People assume that they have more nuclear than we do. They don't. And so that they don't have the nuclear or natural gas power today, but they do have coal in places that have a lot of volatility. And if you know China, then you know that they're always looking at ways to try to ease some of their political volatility. And I think a lot of these coal investments are more political than for the energy, and that's just an assessment of kind of what's going on the ground there. But they are the largest investor in solar and renewable energy. They also are the largest investor right now in electrification and in grid upgrades. I think that is very telling. They're almost where Japan is, where I think 30% um, of their economy is electrified. They spent over 600 billion, that's billion with a B, on electrification and transmission in 2024 alone. And why is that important? Because they're moving away from using coal in their factories. They're modernized their factories, but they're also making it easy to bring in renewables and other types of clean energy. 10 years ago, as I said, it was very clear that China realized that their vehicles were not competing well globally. They were kind of behind the ball in hybrids. So instead of investing in hybrids, they really just leapfrogged into making huge investments in EVs. And today they have a majority of the top 10 highest selling EV cars in the world. They are also investing so much in solar and wind, where I believe they have tripled their wind and solar in the last decade. And now 30% of their clean energy, of their energy comes from hydro, solar, and wind, which is much higher than here in this country. At the same time, they're taking advantage of a clean energy market that is growing exponentially globally. Clean energy investments globally has gone up to now it's over $1 trillion.
Well,
And China has, is a large part of that market and exports.
wow. So let's spin this out a decade since we've kind of taken ourselves out of the clean energy game for the next presumably 4 years. When we do go back into it, what does that mean for the US consumer? Are we just going to be buying Chinese made solar panels, Chinese made EVs? What does that mean for consumers and for our national competitiveness that we have ceded ground so readily?
That's right. That's right. So as I said, China what it is making huge gains in the global market. I believe they right now, or in 2023, the $1 trillion market, they had $96 billion worth of that market. Compared, the United States has only 10 billion. What I found surprising, yeah, what I saw surprising is by the end of this decade, China will have $350 billion worth of that market. And to put that in perspective, it's like Saudi Arabia and I believe UAE combined of their oil exports. That's 350 billion, which is amazing, right? It's just, and so I think the Biden administration and Trump administration, they both have similar goals and trying to increase manufacturing here domestically and trying to be more competitive globally. I will say both administrations have the same goals, but they went about it very differently. Where the Biden administration, instead of putting a tax on consumers through tariffs, provided incentives to reshore manufacturing here at home. And it was working. As I said, manufacturing was up during the Biden administration. And the Biden administration was investing in the next, where the market is going in clean energy, bringing those jobs here. Whereas the Trump administration has said that we need to double down on fossil fuels, which the global community is not doing. And I think just like today, uh, most of our solar panels are made in China because we abdicated our leadership role in the 1980s and 1990s. um, if we continue to abdicate our role in clean hydrogen and other clean technologies, then yes, I think we will continue to see consumers to have to buy China, which is the anti of what the Trump administration seems
Trump
to
wanted,
want to
right?
happen. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
if you let's look at EVs alone. GM and Ford are trying to continue to be competitive in China and globally, and they're getting squeezed out of the market. And that's going to mean real bad news for our auto manufacturing, which is a huge portion of jobs here in this country and a huge portion of our exports. And so I think the cuts in battery manufacturing and EVs, is not just bad for Tesla, but it's also bad for the big 3 and for our long-term competitiveness.
Well, thank you, Laura. I have been speaking with Laura Gillum, founder and president of Resilient Path Strategies. I'm Ann Kim. Thanks for watching.